Alrighty, so I want to tell a story that is not a continuation thread of the Hollywood thing. I'm going to kind of jump ahead. And I had a couple dreams last night that I was going back to Ramthas School. So this video is going to be how I was introduced to the Ramtha phenomena. And I may not publish it, but I'm going to tell it because it's one of those stories that has been in my history for decades, since the 80s. And every now and then I've told somebody little pieces of it, but I just want to get it on the video. And if I occupy myself with the population that is involved in denouncing the phenomena or whatever. So anyway, people seem to like to hear testimonies of how they were introduced to the school, and so I'm going to give mine. And it might be kind of lengthy, so I've avoided it because of the detail, but that is where the interesting parts are in the detail. So, and this isn't really a visual video, but I'm holding the camera on the cat because, you know, I don't want to go in front of the camera. Okay, so in 1986, through a bunch of circumstances, I was living in the Bay Area. I had just finished all this therapy, so I decided to move back to southern Arizona where I am. And I guess I'll go say Bisbee because that's where I lived in the 70s, and it was sort of like my favorite place to come. I had a big, well, anyway, so I came back to Bisbee. And I came based upon a dream I had while I was in the Bay Area. And I might as well say the dream because that also illustrates a little bit about how I receive information. So I'd been in the Bay Area for 6 years. I was doing this therapy, but I was also having a lot of different affairs in the romance department. I was getting kind of a burnout thing. Anyway, so I was wondering, well, you know, the city life was a big deal. So one night I had a dream, and in the dream, I was in an airplane, and I was with all these kids I went to high school with. It was like my high school graduating class, and we're in an airplane. And we're flying around, getting ready to have a party on the plane and wherever we were going, and suddenly the plane starts free falling in a crash mode. And we're all screaming, and I just closed my eyes and hunched over and embraced for this impact, and I actually felt an impact. And then as I felt this impact, like all was dark, and then there was sort of this impact. And I do remember saying to myself, oh, this is a dream, I'm crashing, I hope it doesn't hurt. Well, right at the point of impact, suddenly in my mind's eye, and I'm still in the bed sleeping or dreaming, in my mind's eye, I saw this beautiful blue sky and these fluffy clouds, and then I look down and I see I'm standing in this vision right at the base of the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee. And if anyone's been to Bisbee and you're standing down there on I can't even think of the street, but anyway, you start at Brewery Gulch there, and there's that corner where you're looking up as you walk up the mountain past the Copper Queen Hotel, and it's just a nice shot. You know, you can go online and see Bisbee Copper Queen Hotel. Well, anyway, that was this vision that just bang, it just like WTF. And right when I saw the vision of the Copper Queen and the blue sky, you know, my heart expanded because I was missing being there anyway. So then I woke up in the bed and I said, all right, I just dreamed I crashed from an airplane, graduated with my graduating class, and now I see the Copper Queen in Bisbee, so let's go. So I went and got a car, and I took 2 weeks off, and I said, okay, guys, I'm going on vacation. So I drove to Bisbee and to visit, and my friend Carol was here. And the minute I would, you know, I'd be driving on the interstate, and the minute I would hit Phoenix and start driving south of Phoenix, I'd just start crying, you know, like, oh, like I had some memory system in this whole area, and that was apparent to me, you know. So then, you know, the town itself was not so much the attraction, although it was just the energy of the whole area. Always got to me. So, you know, I'm all, you know, nostalgically happy I'm going back. So I get to town, and I go stay at my friend Carol's, and she lived I might as well detail it. She lived up on Opera Drive at this house that's up this stairway above Opera Drive. And above her was a house that belonged to this woman. This house was abandoned because the sewer line was not working. And it was a cute little house. So anyway, one morning we had tea, and then I went and I walked up to look at this abandoned house. And I sat on the porch looking down, down the canyon. And I had this really strong feeling that said, oh man, I gotta live here. I'm moving. Like I'm gonna leave the Bay Area and all my African dance stuff and all the music. Really, I'm like, what? I had this really strong feeling that it was time to move back to boring, boring, boring Bisbee, Arizona. Rationally, I said, what am I going to do? And then I said back to myself, well, first of all, you can get out of the sexual scene in Berkeley and you can go to Cochise College and get a job. And I knew I could get, after working with disabled people for 6 years, I knew I could get a job at Louis' place and work with these folks. I could probably just get a regular job. And then I was on SSI for 6 years. And then I said, well, man, I want to stop getting that money because I'm not disabled anymore. Thank you for helping me. And it was just like this whole feeling. So I said to my friend Carol, I said, I really feel like moving back. This is not characteristic, but the atmosphere was calling, everything was calling. So I said to myself, well, I got a little over a week to hang out. Let's see what happens. So, and I figured if this was meant to be, that I would find out within the week. So I was walking downtown, and at that time there was a bench against the wall across from the post office, against the building where, anyway, there was a bench that isn't there anymore. So I sat on this bench where you could see the convention center and the post office, and I'm sitting in the sun, and all of a sudden this black man walks down the street past me. And why did I notice it? Well, he's a black man, and in Bisbee, how many dark-skinned people here beside Mexican lived here at all? So it, like not even 5. So I remember wondering why he was here. In my little arrogance, I thought I knew everything about cultural thing. So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder why he's here. And he had a cap on, and he was, walking quietly. And then I stayed on the bench, and now I was wearing my, I was really attached to the African cultural thing. I used to wish I was black, dark skinned, so I could be more included in their race or whatever. I was in my identity thing. I was like my 30s. And so anyway, then he walked past me on the way back, and we kind of nodded at each other. And my brain is thinking, oh, he's nice looking, but he's not my type, all this. But I was quite interested in who he was. So as he walked past me again, this time he walked right up to me and introduced himself. He said, how are you doing? And he was real formal and real serious. He wasn't, jumping around or being funny or cute or anything. He was almost like a business person. And yet, maybe because of what I was wearing on my head or whatever, he figured I was, whatever, kindred. So I told him I was here visiting, and I knew the town from previous and all that. So then he says, well, I work at Garski's bookstore. He said, come over and visit. And so I did. The next day I went to the bookstore. And I walked in, and I pretended like I was looking at some books. And then I sat down. He was sitting behind his big desk. And I sat across from him, and we started talking. And he was a really stoic, serious man. And off the bat, I found out he was a Vietnam veteran, a Marine veteran who had been in combat. He was about 10 years older than me. He never once smiled. We talked for 4 hours. And the way we spoke was unlike any other way I'd spoken to anyone before. I felt kind of inferior in a funny kind of way to him, because he had this maturity that, I didn't quite feel like I had, which I didn't at that time. But yet, the 4 hours went by like nothing, and there was just some way that immediately, first of all, I thought, well, I'd never move back to Bisbee because I would miss all the black people that I knew in Berkeley and Oakland. I would miss the culture, the African culture. How would I'd be freaking bored in Bisbee. Well, so anyway, here's this black man that kind of kept me connected to that culture, is how it felt. And we had this something in common. Now, physically and such, he wasn't like I didn't think of sexuality right away. So that was interesting. But yet, everything, it was like the term soulmate came to mind straight away. And shortly I found out he felt the same. But at the time, I was just like, whoa. So the 4 hours happened, and I left there just pretty high as a kite because I thought, oh, well, maybe there's this future with this person. Well, I went to Carol, told her about him, and she says, oh, stay away from him. She says he's an angry vet. And we knew that, but it was interesting just to see how, you know, she had watched me go in and out of all these relationships with difficult men, so she was kind of saying he might be the same. But anyway, so the next day I went back again to the bookstore and we talked again for 4 hours. And the third day I invited, so then what happened? I'm walking around and I found this house for rent for $250 a month. It was an old adobe house on Wood Canyon, and the owner was this German gentleman and his wife who owned the Mile High Motel. And anyway, the point being, I figured to myself, well, for some reason, I heard about the house. I went and looked at it, and when I was standing in the house, I said, boom, I guess I'm moving back to Arizona because I found a house to rent. And I put 3 months down worth of rent on it because I said it's going to take me at least a month or two to go back to California and tell everybody and then get it together to move. So I put 3 months worth of rent down, and I found a friend to caretake it while I was gone. And then the man I had met, I'll say his name because he's not here anymore, his name was Lavelle. So I invited Lavelle to come to this house that I was getting ready to rent, that I had rented, and we're both sitting on the floor. We had not touched each other yet. It was like day 3 of knowing each other. And I was in the habit of jumping in the bed pretty quick with someone if I liked them or whatever, or they liked me. We kind of do that first. But this man I was trying to stay away from because I still had an old boyfriend back in California. You know, I was trying to kind of be whatever, respectful of the energy thing. And so we sat across the floor from each other and just talked for a while longer. And then I guess I'll just say this intimately, is I'm trying to get around to the Ramthas story, but I want to just describe the relationship with him. And it's only 13 minutes, so maybe I can race through it. So the fourth day, he had all right, here's the Ramtha part. So he had, at the time he was living with this good friend of his named Sharon, and they had a house, apartment together, and she had a room, he had a room. Were they lovers? Well, maybe they were, but they were really good friends enough so that he immediately told her, before I left to go back to California, he immediately told her that he had found his soulmate person, and you know, and all that. And I met her, and she wasn't acting flaming jealous or anything, so I figured it was all good. And then I went to his house, and the very first time he and I physically got together was he laid down on the couch and I lay down on top of him, and neither of us moved a muscle for like an hour. I mean, it was like we didn't move a muscle for like an hour. Nothing. And then I got up and left. And that's how he told me later he knew he was in love with me, and I knew this was more than sex, let's put it that way. So anyway, well, here's the story about how the Ramtha thing came in the picture. I asked him, well, how did you come to Bisbee? So here's what he said. He said that him and Sharon were friends in New York City. They were both from New York City. And they were involved in theater productions. He was involved in different productions of like fashion shows and things like this, and he worked behind the scenes, behind the stage. And Sharon was his good friend. And that there had been an accident where a scaffolding had fallen, and Lavelle received an injury on his ribs, and so from this scaffold thing falling on him or whatever. So he had some, little body trauma from that event, either before or after this situation, where one day he described it as Sharon says to Lavelle, hey, there's a woman named J.Z. Knight who's having a little channeling meeting at her house. This is before 1988, so this is before the school opened. So Sharon says to Lavelle, you want to come and see this this lady channeling this 35,000-year-old dude and all that. So Lavelle went to the house, and at the house there was a small handful of people, like 20 people or something. And Jay-Z went into the trance, and Ramtha came out. And he was answering questions in those days. So people would stand up and say, Ramtha, what is my past life? And Ramtha would say something and this and that. Now, I have a cassette tape, and I believe I still have it. Although my tapes got stolen, so I'm not sure I still have it. But Lavelle gave me this cassette tape because someone recorded this whole meeting. And so I had the tape, I remember it in my head, where other people asked their questions and Ramtha's answering. Well, then Lavelle's turn came, and on the tape, he didn't ask a question. Instead, I wish I could play it. Instead, what Lavelle did was he stood up and he just greeted Ramtha as a complete equal. He just saluted him and spoke to Ramtha right off the bat as if he knew him, recognized him, and the Ramtha entity was a complete equal to him. And none of the other people in the audience had spoken like that. They were all asking questions as if their little human self was just, submissively unaware of what they needed to know about themselves. But the way Lavelle spoke to Ramtha was complete equal, like he knew himself enough and he was recognizing this entity was a real person. It wasn't sarcastic. Now, I'm listening to this and looking at the fact that this man, this black man, was addressing this white woman channeling this alleged entity, and with all respect. And then I forget exactly what Lavelle said to Ramtha, or maybe addressed, well, what's my purpose, validate that. Well, then Ramtha went into this long, this was back when Ramtha used to say, as it were indeed, and all that, when Ramtha talked the way he talked back then. And so then Ramtha went into this long dialogue, and he told Lavelle things like this. He said, you will have an effect on the world in a way where, for example, you'll be able to project from your mind in a visual fashion consciousness. Well, it's hard for me to describe it, but basically, Ramtha told Lavelle what his powers and gifts were and how they were going to manifest in the future in the world in his daily life. And there's way more to it than that. But that conversation was the longest one. I remember it lasted like 5-10 minutes, where Ramtha was addressing Lavelle back and forth about it. And they spoke to each other, like in a military fashion, kind of like the commander would speak to, this is what your mission is, like that. And Lavelle was already familiar with his powers, so this was, to him, as I learned throughout the years, a validation of that. Okay. So then, so I said, oh, okay, so then you just, so that meeting happened in New York, and Sharon was at that. This is what I remember. So Sharon hears this. I hope I got it right. So Sharon then asked Ramtha some question, and Ramtha said this to her, said, if you go to this town, and he mentioned, I don't know if he said the word Bisbee, but he mentioned Bisbee, Arizona. He said to Sharon, if you go to this town, go to the cemetery and go find the headstone of this guy. And she, Rantha named the name of the man and told Sharon that she, in her past life, was this guy. And that body was buried in this town called Bisbee at the cemetery. And I think this is written in one of the books that came out about the Ramthas phenomena. Well, when a channel dude gives you the name of your past life person, so they buried at a cemetery, so Lavelle and Sharon came to Bisbee, went to the cemetery, and found it. Okay, I wish I had more proof of that. I wish Sharon was here and all this, but nevertheless, they both came here and found it and decided to stay and move here. And Lavelle had other reasons why leaving New York was something that he felt like he needed to do anyway. But anyway, so I met him and her right, I guess they had been here, so it was 85 when I came here, so I guess they had been here a couple years already. Well, so I heard that, so that was interesting. So I meet this black man in Bisbee, Arizona, where it's all white people and Mexican, wondering why he's here, and that was the reason that he came with Sharon. So they were living together on that. So that was impressive enough to me that there was such a phenomena as a woman named J.Z. Knight able to channel this dude that could access the Akashic records and tell people all this information that otherwise they wouldn't know. What a phenomena, right? Well, then I went back to California and I told everyone I'm moving. No one liked it, and I was studying in music. I was only learning my third song, and I left, and I came back because here I met my soulmate. So, you know, I mean, I wasn't going to pass that up and stay in California. So I came back here, and when I got back, there was a building in town called the Golden Flower, which is now not called that, and it was across from Central School, and a man named John Milton owned it, and he he opened it up as a meditation center and stuff like this. So once a week, people would go to the Golden Flower for different events, and back in those days, it was a VHS tape thing and a cassette tape thing. So there was a friend here, she's still here, named June, and June was friends with Lavelle, and June had all these Ramthas tapes on cassette, and so I come back, and within a month, Lavelle moved in with me at that house, and we were living together, and then he had all these Ramthas tapes. So I'd stick them in the cassette and listen. And then the very first time I heard Ramthas talk, this is before the school, so this was 85. I think the school officially opened in 88. So anyway, I was just extremely affected by the way that Ramthas delivered information. And this is not to say it's the first time anyone talked about this sort of things that he was talking about, but nevertheless, everyone has their teacher or has their influence. And I had read books, I listened to other channels, but this guy, he affected me the most. Not even because of what Lavelle said, but because the first teaching I listened to on the tape was about the brain, and mentioned something about marijuana, which a couple years later caused me to stop smoking. I stopped smoking marijuana for 8 years as a result of what he had said about the marijuana, which I won't repeat that. But what I wanted to say was, so Ramtha was all the rage, you know, as was Ashtar Command and all that, but Ramtha was all the rage to the point where June Cabot, or